Thank you everyone so much. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're all set. You're all set. We're on. That looks great. Okay. So welcome to the last special Numisma talk of National Coin Week 2024. Every day this week, we have had a new speaker come and talk to us and present something that will help celebrate this special week. So thank you for joining us. During this presentation, you may come up with questions, and if you do, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and that'll send them to me, and then hopefully, if we have time, we'll be able to answer some or most of them. As you guys are muted, this is really the only way to communicate, so make sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom. Your question will be addressed at the end of the presentation, and with that, I would now like to introduce to you all today's presenter, Peter von Alfen, Peter joined the ANS in 2002 to oversee their Greek cabinet, and he serves as the Society Editor of the American Journal of Numismatics, the editor of the ANS magazine, and as the co-director of the Eric P. Newman Graduate Summer Seminar in Numismatics. He has curated a number of exhibits and taught occasional courses at New York University as an adjunct professor in the Department of Classics. Peter will be presenting Numismatics Online, Changing the World of Research and Collecting. And now, Peter, it's up to you.
Before I begin, I really just want to start by thanking all of our friends and colleagues at the American Numismatic Association, and particularly Doug Mudd for the invitation to speak to you all tonight. It really is a pleasure and honor to have this opportunity, especially during National Coin Week. So I am going to share my screen now. There we go. Is that all right?
Yes, looks great.
All right, very good. All right, so as I'm sure most of you know, there have been, with every passing year, more and more digital resources available online for those interested in most every aspect of numismatics. And platforms like YouTube abound in instructional and other videos, and institutions like the ANA and the ANS offer various virtual programs and talks, like this one, of course. And dealers now make it incredibly easy to build collections anywhere you might be with a smartphone in your hand. In recent years, there have been a number of specialized digital resources for numismatics that have been rapidly expanding as well, too, which now is really transforming the way that we do numismatic research, whether you're a scholar or a collector. And many of these resources have been developed and are maintained by the American Numismatic Society, which has long been at the forefront of digitization efforts, starting, in fact, a good number of decades ago. So in the first part of my talk this evening, I'll discuss how some of these resources were developed at the Numismatic Society, how they function, and how they are serving to transform aspects of research and collecting. And then in the second part, I'll survey some additional specialized online resources and point to what we can expect in the future. All right. So at the American Numismatic Society, like many other museums with very large numismatic collections, our digital efforts began and continue in large measure to be focused on efforts to catalog and photograph our collection of roughly 800,000 numismatic items, and to make all of this information and the photos freely available online. And let me tell you, this has been no easy task. In fact, our efforts in all of this began over 40 years ago with the purchase of a prime mainframe computer to create our very first digital catalog of the collection. And in fact, the Numismatic Society was one of the very first museums to launch a digital effort like this, in part because Harry Bass, who was one of our benefactors and also a benefactor of the American Numismatic Association, was very keen on computerization and made this possible for us. This cataloging effort, in fact, still is ongoing 40 years later, and has, in the meantime, over the last 4 decades, had its problems, which I'll discuss in a moment. So around the time that I started at the ANS 22 years ago now, we were making our first attempts, in fact, to push this internal digital catalog online. And here what you see is, thanks to the Wayback Machine, a glimpse at what our online what we looked like online about 20 years ago. This was our landing page in blue, and then our very basic database search below that. Now, at that time that we were starting to push everything online as well, we were starting to migrate all the data that had been on that prime computer using a proprietary back-end system that had been developed in part, with Harry Bass, into another database system called FileMaker Pro, which is something that some of you might be familiar with. And this, in fact, is a program that we have continued to use over the last 20 years, but we are now, in fact, in the process, a 2-year-long process, in fact, of migrating all of that data from FileMaker into a web-based platform called Collective Access, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And so users of our current online numismatic catalog, which we now call Mantis, will, I'm sure, appreciate the changes and updates that we've made over the last 20 years. But there are still some perennial problems with the catalog that have remained, and these are primarily non-standardized entries and terminology that are in the database, as well as incomplete data. And this is our Mantis search tool now for, in this case, the Greek department. So what this slide here shows you is a glimpse at the back ends. This is the FileMaker record that we work with internally, and then the way that that record appears through Mantis online. And you'll see that a great deal of that data, makes its way, just straight across into Mantis. And this is for better or worse. And in fact, in many cases, the problem that remains is that we do have a good number of what we consider incomplete records, which you can see here that just has very basic data for that particular coin. And in this case, no photo at all. And if you compare it then to this record, which is far more complete, including a photograph, this is where we are trying to go with the records for all 800,000 objects. But part of the problem also then is that we have, a great deal of non-standardized terminology, which is something I'll come back to in a moment. So while we have been working for the last 40 years on this development or this cataloging project, which is, as I mentioned now, is being migrated from FileMaker, which is what you see here, into Collective Access. Let me go back to that. We have also, in the process, been cleaning up a lot of the data, and this has been an enormous undertaking. So we are hoping that by the end of this year of 2024, users of Mantis will see a dramatic improvement in the quality of the data and the searchability of our online search tool and catalog. So we had just recently finished actually migrating the data from the metals department, medallic art department, and the Islamic collection into Mantis. So users should already see a dramatic improvement there. And by probably the end of next week, the Greek, Roman, and Byzantine departments will also be migrated over, and we'll continue then with the US and South American and medieval and early modern and so forth. So stay tuned. It's going to get much, much better. So while we have been working on that very important project, we also have, in the meantime, been building out a whole array of digital resources. And you can see here a whole bunch of acronyms for these, CRO and RRDP and OCR and so forth. And I'll talk a little bit about these now. So if you go to this page on our website, numismatics.org/resources, you will see a list of all 18 of these specialized resources that we have developed over the last several years on that page and be able to click on the links and go to them directly. So on this screen grab here, you just see 4 out of the 18. When we started this push roughly 15 years ago, most of our effort initially was devoted to projects that focused on the Roman Republican and Imperial coinage, including coinage of the Roman Republic online, CRO, and you can see this very clever banner that our photographer Alan Roche developed. In fact, Alan developed most of these banners, these very attractive banners that you'll see throughout my presentation here. So CRO is based on Michael Crawford's 1973 volume Roman Republic or Roman Republican coinage. And this, of course, is one of the standard references for this. And we developed CRO in conjunction with some of our colleagues at the British Museum. At the same time, Online Coins of the Roman Empire, which is based on the print volumes of Roman imperial coinage, which is now, of course, published by Spink & Son, was our first project, in fact, to receive major funding for development from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And as you'll see in a moment, as I talk a little bit about how we develop these, building these resources requires a great deal of time and effort, which makes this sort of outside funding absolutely critical. So work on the Roman side of things continues, and not just with these continued updates to both CRO as well as Ochre, but with the development of new resources like the Roman Republic Die Project. And this is something that we launched, I think, about 2-3 years now ago. And this is based on this decades-long effort by Richard Schaefer to do an entirely comprehensive die study of Roman Republican coinage. And we now have digitized his notebooks and all of the work that he put into this, and have been then building out this site, which in fact is now beginning to have an impact on CRO, because some of the attributions and dating and so forth that Crawford developed 50 years ago now, of course, have to be revisited. And this is largely thanks to RRDP and Dick Schaefer's work. And then we also have this site, Coin Hoards of the Roman Republic Online, which also has been developed with some colleagues in Britain, in this case, Chris Lockyer, who developed a database of Roman Republican coin hoards, which he very graciously allowed us then to continue to develop and then launch this site specifically for Roman Republican coin hoards. Now, no matter what the focus of these specific sites might be, all of these ANS-based projects share certain common features and functions, and this is made possible in part by Numishare. And this is an open source platform that has been developed by Ethan Gruber, who is the Numismatic Society's Director of Data Science. And this platform, which is very critical for linking all of this information together, as you'll see in a moment, has been, in fact, adopted by a number of other non-ANS digital resources, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. So a number of years ago, leveraging this expertise that was developed in building sites like Ochre, Online Coins of the Roman Empire, Ethan and I applied for and received another NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities grant, to build out a new suite of Numishare-based websites devoted, in this case, to Hellenistic royal coinages, which is more my specialization. I'm primarily a Greek coin specialist. And these, of course, are the coinages of Alexander the Great and his successors, such as the Ptolemies, Seleucids, and so forth. And what you see here on this page, or on this slide, is the banner of the landing page for an umbrella site that links together all of the various component parts of Hellenistic royal coinages. And in fact, even before we applied for that grant back in 2017, we had already launched Pella, which is a site that was initially devoted to the coinage in the name of Alexander the Great. And in part of the reason for developing this independently is because the Numismatic Society has a massive collection of coinage in the name of Alexander the Great, which was donated in large part by Edward Newell back in the early part of the 20th century. He was a major Hellenistic coin specialist and had amassed a very large and important collection of that. But more recently, we've also expanded Pella beyond just the coinage of Alexander the Great to also include the coinages of Alexander's father, Philip II. And this is based in large part on the typology that was published by Georges Leridaire back in 1997. And in fact, the core part of Pella focusing on the coinage of Alexander the Great is based on Martin Price's definitive study of that coinage that was published in 1991. And ultimately, the plan then with Pella is to try to expand this all the way back to Alexander I, so then to cover the entirety of the Macedonian kings. Another component part of the HRC project was, or is Seleucid Coins Online, and this was launched in 2018. And this is based on the Seleucid coin typology that was developed by Arthur Houghton, Kathy Lorber, and Oliver Hoover for the print publication Seleucid Coins that was published in 4 volumes about 20 years ago now. And in the meantime, of course, they've done some revisions to that typology, which we've been able to incorporate then into this online resource of Seleucid coins. Kathy Lorber's new typology of Ptolemaic coinage, which was recently published by the Numismatic Society, serves as the basis for Ptolemaic coins online. And at present, PCO covers the coinages of Ptolemy I Soter down to Ptolemy IV. And in fact, the second part of her magnum opus, this huge study that she's done of Ptolemaic coinage, is about to be published by the ANS. And once that is out in print, we will then incorporate the remainder of her typology down through Cleopatra VII. So within about a year, maybe 2, we should then have a full typology for Ptolemaic coinage from Ptolemy I all the way down to Cleopatra VII. And even though Antigonid coinage was not part of our original plan, it just so happened that Andy Meadows, a former colleague of ours at the Numismatic Society and now based at Oxford University, had already, in fact, digitized Edward Newell's typology of the coinage of Demetrius Poliorcetes. And so we went ahead and incorporated that and launched Antigonid coins online as well a little while ago. But the most recent component part of this, another typological site, is BIGGER, an acronym that we came up with to represent Bactrian and Indo-Greek rulers. And this, in fact, is an entirely new typology that was developed by Simon Glenn and Gunnar Dumke, a couple of our colleagues in England and Germany, based on their dissertations. In fact, each of them had written dissertations that deal with this type of coinage, and with another large grant from, in fact, this was a joint grant between the Arts and Humanities Research Council based in the UK and the NEH based in the US. This was a joint funding program. We were able to get yet another grant to develop this program over 2 years. And so we launched this just this last year in 2023, in fact, or late 2022, early 2023. And in fact, as you probably have noticed, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, the typologies that we've been developing that these websites are based on have mostly been based on standard references, such as Martin Price's study of Alexander the Great's coinage, and Houghton and Lorber and Hoover's study of Seleucid coins, and so forth. In this case, there really wasn't a definitive typology for this coinage. And so Simon Glenn and Gunnar Dumke, in fact, developed a brand new typology for this, which was essentially launched in addition to the site itself. Coinhoards.org is another component part of this, and this is based on the 1973 publication, Inventory of Greek Coin Hoards. Now, in fact, we launched a version of this coinhoards.org probably 15 years ago or so, but it was very rudimentary, and it was, essentially a beta testing site to try out some things that we were wanting to experiment with. And so as part of this larger HRC project, we completely revised this and made it incredibly more functional and more usable. The thing is, however, that this is still based primarily on that 1973 publication, but there are plans this year to start revising this to add more hoard information for more recent hoards, as well as updates on some of these hoards that were published 50 years ago in IGCH, Inventory of Greek Coin Hoards. So hopefully, again, by the end of this year, you'll start to see some new developments in coin hoards as we begin to work on version 3 now of coinhoards.org. And finally, the last component of the HRC project, in fact, was continuing to build out Archer, which is the Numismatic Society's archives website. And in fact, this has been something that has been around for a while. In fact, as part of our library digitization efforts, that also was put online, back in roughly right around the year 2000. And has continued to build out. This is something we call Donum, the library search tool. But more recently, we've been spending a lot of effort on Archer to digitize, in fact, with the numismatic portal, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, a lot of our archives, and then to put it on to Archer as well. And as you'll see in a moment, there are important component parts or aspects of Archer which play into what we were doing with Hellenistic royal coinages. And this includes, in fact, digitizing a lot of Edward Newell's notebooks, these handwritten notebooks of his, where he was recording hoards or observations of coins that he owned or from museum visits and so forth. So these Newell notebooks are incredibly useful and valuable for doing research on Hellenistic coinage particularly. All right, so before turning to what these resources do, I want to just spend a moment talking about how we build these, because it's important, in fact, for you to understand how we build these in order to also understand what they are doing and how they function to a large degree. Now, when I was talking about the way that we are trying to catalog the Numismatic Society's massive collection of numismatic items, I did mention part of the problem that we're having is a lack of standardization in the terminology and the stabilization of some of these concepts. And what you see here, you don't really need to read all of the various entries here, but just notice that there is not a tremendous amount of standardization in the obverse and reverse descriptions of all of these Athenian owls. And this is due in large part, in fact, by the fact that over 40 years, a good number of individuals at different times have made these entries without sort of an overriding program for standardizing obverse reverse descriptions and then also standardizing some of the other terminology. And so ideally what we'd like to see is something that looks more like this, where there you can see by comparison that there is a great deal more standardization in this spreadsheet than there is in the previous one. Now, standardizing this type of terminology internally, within the Numismatic Society is all well and good, but when we are trying to then build a larger internationally linked web resource, which is mostly what we're trying to do, then we need to be able to standardize terminology, not just within the Numismatic Society, but also with our colleagues based at all of these other institutions, whether they're in other parts of the United States or in England or in Germany or France or any other part of the world. And so what we have been endeavoring to do over the last 15, 20 years, or roughly 15 years, is trying to collaborate between all of these various interested parties, mostly curators at other institutions, to come up with stabilized and defined terminology for um, people, place, mint names, concepts, and everything else that relates to numismatic cataloging. And so what you see here, in fact, is a spreadsheet that's devoted to an attempt to try to define the type of materials, especially the metals that are used in the production of some of the coinages. And then as part of this, we also then scour the web for references, such as the British Museum Thesaurus, where they have already tried to define some of this terminology that we can then use as well as a reference. Um, Trying to define some of this is, in many cases, not particularly easy. And in fact, if you think for a moment about the problem of relating an authority, or say a king or some sort of issuing authority to a place, it does get incredibly complicated at times, especially when you think about, say, medieval or early modern arrangements within Europe. And so what you see here, in fact, is an exercise that one of my colleagues at the Numismatic Society, David Yoon, did to try to think about some of the problems here, say place of authority, place of superordinate authority, place of stated authority, and so forth, and to define what it is that we mean by that and how then that might have an impact on our cataloging. And so in many cases, it really is a much more complicated problem, especially when you begin to think about some of these problems, and especially within certain subfields of numismatics, just how complex some of these problems might be. So, as an attempt, again, to create sort of a universal, global, standardized terminology for some of these concepts for people, places, and so forth, roughly 15 years ago, Andrew Meadows, who then was at the Numismatic Society, as well as Sebastian Heath, initiated this nomisma.org project, which now is a fairly large-scale international collaboration between, again, mostly curators and others working in various institutions to create a online thesaurus, but also a repository for stabilized concepts and so forth that then will have a stabilized link, a ULR link, which is very important for building out some of these projects, as I'll describe in a moment. And so this is a ongoing project. And in fact, I'm part of this scientific committee, and we have monthly meetings to discuss some of the problems. And then there are various working groups or subcommittees devoted, say, to Greek coinage, Roman coinage, medieval coinage, and so forth, that also then meet to develop terminology and stabilize concepts and so forth. And so for all of these type of digital resources that we're building, this is a key building block, key foundation then for what we are doing, both at the Numismatic Society, but then what our colleagues are doing elsewhere, and then allows us to be able to link all of this together, which again, I'll talk about. So if you look at, if you start to dig into nomisma.org a little bit, you'll see that there are places such as Athens then that have been defined, and you'll see that one of the great things then about having this type of resource is that we are able then to link in a whole bunch of other information about that, whether it's geocoding or various types of or different languages, the way that Athens is expressed, and all of the world's languages and so forth, as well as other more critically important tools then for linking all of this data together. So since most of us who have been working on nomisma.org are involved in one way or the other with the ancient world, you'll see that the ancient world concepts and terminology is built out a great deal more than later concepts. But this is something that we are at the moment really trying to rectify, to try to build this into a much more expansive numismatic tool that will cover not just coinage of the ancient world, but also coinage of the modern world and so forth. Now, once we have these building blocks in place, which includes cataloging, collections and these nomisma.org IDs, as we call them, or the standardized terms, then we can start to build out all of this. And as I've hinted, linking stuff together is a critical component of all of that. And there are a great deal of resources that are out there that deal with different aspects of looking at the world, not just the ancient world, but also, say, the medieval world, early modern world, and so forth, that include studies of one sort or another, or collections, or hoards, or finds, and individual collection specimens, and so forth. And so what we are trying to do then is try to link all of this data and all of this information together to build out, what we hope will be, very comprehensive in a lot of ways, but also very useful resources. And Nomisma actually acts in many ways as a node, as a hub for linking all of this information together, where we can take a typology that we build out, link that through Nomisma, and be able to link in individual collections as well as information such as hoard finds from coin hoards, et cetera, and be able to sort of link and route all of this through Nomisma for all of these various projects. And, as I mentioned, there are a great number of other numismatic web-based resources that might deal, say, with mapping, that might deal with texts, that might have different components that might be useful for us in terms of trying to build out all of this. And again, what we are trying then to do is work on these concepts of linked open data, or LOD. That again is sort of locally based, but just trying to find a way then to link it all together in a way that is standardized and that will have interfunctionality and so forth. So again, this is something that we feel is very important, and just being able to link everything together and have it work all well together. And so part of what we do with nomisma.org is just discuss these concepts and how that all will work together. So once we have set the foundations essentially for linking everything together, then of course one part of all of this then for many of these resources is building the typological foundation. In fact, most of what I've described so far in terms of, say, online coins of the Roman Empire and Hellenistic royal coinages are typologies. And this is something that most numismatists are familiar with when you talk about a coin being, say, a certain type, whether it's a price, 432 or a Judd this or whatever else. There is somebody who has done a definitive study of that coinage or that series and has created a typology, and that then is the basis for these tools that we're building, these typological tools. So in the case of Pella, for example, as I mentioned, we based this on Martin Price's magisterial volume on coinage in the name of Alexander the Great and Philip Aridaeus. So Price, of course, had created a typology of, I think, 4,000, if I remember, roughly 4,400 different types of coinage in the name of Alexander the Great. And so what we needed to do then was digitize this, create a digital version of Price's typology. And that basically then is sitting down with a copy of Price's book and just typing all of this out into a spreadsheet. So for that initial massive spreadsheet, Andy Meadows and I split the task. He did the first 2,000 and I did the second 2,000, just line by line by line. And of course, this takes a great deal of time, but the results, we think are well worth it, because this then allows us to build what you see on these on these pages. So if you go into, for example, Pella, and click on price 4, you will then be directed to this type page for price 4. And then you can see here the typological description, the mint, the obverse reverse, I'm sorry, and et cetera. And all of these little red arrows here that you see, in fact, are nomisma.org links. In other words, these are terms that we have standardized and linked in then to stabilize, standardize all of this terminology. And you'll also notice that the mapping of both where the mint was located for this type, as well as find spots and hoard finds and so forth, then is also made possible by this linking and interfunctionality between all of these various sites. So once we have built the type page, the next step then is to link in as many specimens of price 4 in that case as we possibly can. And this then requires that we work closely with our colleagues in various institutions and collections to try to find a way then to link all of their price 4s into the type page for price 4. And typically that means then that they need to take a URL that we create for that type and then drop it into their catalog record for that particular coin. And, as you can imagine, this is also a little laborious as well, but the results are really quite spectacular. And so at the moment for HRC, as you can see, we have over 41,000 coins that are linked into the various pages within HRC. And this, in fact, pales in comparison to the number of coins that are linked into online coins of the Roman Empire, which you can see is approaching 200,000 coins from 56 different contributors. And that contributors in this case mostly are museums like the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, or the British Museum, or the Münzcabinet in Berlin, or various other university collections and so forth. But in order for these individual specimens to be linked into the type pages, they need to already exist online. And that is a critical factor in all of this, because if it doesn't exist online, if it hasn't been cataloged in a way that is presented online in a linkable fashion, then we cannot, unfortunately, link it in. So we have also been working very closely with smaller collections, some university collections and others, in order to help them facilitate their ability then to link in their material into all of these various projects. And, in this case, if you go to the 56 examples that we have of price 4 on that particular page, if you just scroll down to the specimens list, there are 56 examples from 5 different collections. And if you then click on the individual link for that specimen, it will then take you to the page in that collection, whether it's, for example, the Numismatic Society or the Münzcabinet in Berlin or so forth. So again, this is made possible by close collaboration with all of our various colleagues in various places. So how do you use this then? As I mentioned, all of the digital resources that we've been building at the Numismatic Society are based on Ethan Gruber's NumiShare platform. So they all share common functionalities, although some of the specificities, of course, differ depending on the type of coinage and what have you. But in this case, this again is the landing page for the umbrella site for Hellenistic royal coinages, which links into all of those different components, whether it's the Ptolemaic coinage or the Seleucid coinage or the Antigonid coinage or the Bactrian coinage or whatever. You can search all of those component parts through this page. Or if you want to just focus on Seleucid, then you can just go to the Seleucid site and go from there. If you click on Browse, in fact, if you look just along the top of the web page there, you'll see a number of different buttons. Browse, maps, et cetera, et cetera. And if you click on Browse, that'll then just take you to the very first page of the typology. In this case, with HRC, it starts with Newell's Demetrius Polycartes #1, and it indicates that there are 2 LinkedIn objects, gives you a basic type overview and so forth. And then if you click on that, that will then take you to that individual type page and give you the overview of the type, as well as whatever specimens in the map and so forth. One thing to note here too is that in the upper left-hand corner, we have data options, and this allows you then to download all of the data that we have behind the scenes in these sites. And that will then allow you, for example, if you want to do a search for a particular type of coinage, and then once you bring up that page or that list of coins, you can then download all of the information as for example, a CSV file, which you can then just plug directly into an Excel spreadsheet, and voila, you have all of the data that you can then work with however you want. We also have a language function, and again, because we are building these through international collaborations, and we are hoping that we will have worldwide users. One critical component of all of this has been making sure that people all over the world can use these resources. And so we've been working very closely with various colleagues to translate parts of the websites so that we have dozens of different languages represented. Of course, all the major European languages, but then, for example, we also have Turkish and Arabic as possible languages as well, as you can see here. The mapping function then allows you to build maps however you want to configure those maps, whether based on, for example, authority or issuer or deity and so forth. And then you will then have that map presented however it is that you want with whatever data from the resource presented in this fashion. For Hellenistic royal coinages, we also have this symbol function. A lot of Hellenistic coinages, of course, had monograms and other symbols on the reverse of the coins. And this is still something that we don't fully understand the purpose of. And it's obvious in some cases that this represents, say, a magistrate or some other authority that had something to do with the coinage, but we don't always fully understand the purpose of every single one of these monograms. And so one of the things that we wanted to do with this was make it possible to search across the totality of Hellenistic royal coinage for monograms, just to see where these monograms are appearing and how they possibly are functioning. And so for the thousands of monograms that appear, we then have built this monogram search tool. So if you know your Greek letters, and if you look at this monogram, for example, you might see a gamma. So you could click gamma. You could click yet or something, and just whatever letters you think you see in that, click on that, and that will then pull up whatever monograms we determined. Sometimes rather subjectively, that were built into some of these monograms. The visualize queries function allows you to build various measurement and other analyses. And in fact, what this shows is a graph of all the weights of tetradrams. There's roughly, I think, 20,000 tetradrams in HRC at the moment. And so this shows the weights of all 20,000 of those arranged chronologically. And you can see that over time, there does seem to have been a dip in the weight of tetradrams, on that mostly struck on the Attic standard, whatever that was at whatever period. Although this little rise right here, in fact, is based on some bad data from the British Museum. So ignore that little hump. And then for the computer nerds, we also have the AIPs and everything else as just documentation and other functionalities that you can just grab and do it if you want there. So that then shows you how to use the typologies that we've built. Coinhoards.org is slightly different. And of course, as I mentioned, this is based on IGCH, the Inventory of Greek Coin Hoards. And so what you'll see here is the basic description of the hoard, the find spot, all data that was lifted directly from and digitized again in a massive spreadsheet from IGCH, but also then has this mapping function that shows where the hoard was found here in Egypt, but then all of the various mints represented in that hoards the size of the circle here then indicates the number of coins proportionally found in that hoard. So then if you scroll down, continue to scroll down that page, you'll then find individual typological descriptions for the coins found in that. And then you'll also find illustrations of coins where possible, whether at the Numismatic Society or other collections where they've been identified as belonging to that hoard. You'll then find illustrations of those coins farther down that page as well. And in some cases, you'll also then find illustrations, annotated illustrations of Newell's notebooks or any other associated archival material we might have associated with that particular hoard. So in this case, with IGCH 1664, Newell in fact had recorded this hoard initially. And so his notebook appears then annotated at the bottom of that page as well, or at least a link to that. So you can see then what Newell initially observed when he was recording that hoard. All right, so that then is the first part where I've been talking then about the Numismatic Society's digitization endeavors and resources. Now, I want to spend a few minutes then talking about other digital resources that are out there. And some of these have also been developed in collaboration with the Numismatic Society. And of course, as our colleagues help us with our projects, we are more than happy to help them with their projects as much as we possibly can. I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with these auction site aggregators, such as coinarchives.com, which was developed by AJ Gatling, I think 20 years ago now, and Wildwinds, which is now being maintained by Dane Kurth. And these are incredibly useful and important resources. Of course, this just brings together a lot of current and older auction information and allows you to search for various coins or coinages and so forth. And of course, one of our hopes ultimately is to be able to incorporate a lot of the material that appears on these sites into the typological sites that we've been building as well, so that you can have a much more comprehensive overview of, say, price for or whatever other type that might be out there. But there are some problems with that mostly have to do with ways to capture, say, a price for within coin archives and then be able to link it in. So that is a hope and an ongoing conversation, but we haven't quite yet resolved all that. There are, of course, a good number of collection resources out there, and I've already mentioned, for example, the the Bibliothèque Nationale in France and Paris's collection and the Munch Cabinet and the British Museum and so forth. But there are, in fact, some other collection resources, such as the Siloge Nomorum Graecorum website, which this, of course, is an important print publication program that was started over a century ago in England as a way to illustrate in a very basic manner Greek collections in various institutions. And of course, the Numismatic Society published 8 or 9 volumes of the S&G series before we finally just gave up on that and started to focus more on our digital efforts. But there are, in fact, still a good number of these print publications that are going on and attempts then to digitize that information and present it on this website. So it's not as complete as you might hope, but at least it does offer a way to search some of the S&G volumes. And then this, in fact, is another collection that we at the Numismatic Society published. This is the collection of the Egyptian National Library, and this is a resource that you can find then on our resources page as well. There are, as you might expect, a good number of other typology-based web resources out there. And this Arch project, which is being developed by colleagues in Britain and France, spearheaded mostly by Andy Meadows at Oxford, is an attempt to link together as sort of an overarching resource to link together all of the various individual typological projects for Greek coinage. So this would include Hellenistic royal coinages and all the work we've done, but then also all of the work that other colleagues have done in other places. So if you are interested in Greek coinage, this increasingly, this in fact was just launched this last year, but work on this continues, and it will, I think, over time, be a very important resource for understanding and studying Greek coinage. There are other sites at the moment devoted to some aspect of Greek or Roman coinage, and that includes Corpus Numorum, and this is being developed by German colleagues in Berlin. This focuses mostly on the coinage of Thrace in that area around the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, between Turkey and Bulgaria, basically today. And then Histoire Numorum is a project that this is a title I'm sure that some of you might recognize from Barclay Head's an important attempt to have a comprehensive overview of Greek coinage that was published initially in 1887, then again in 1911. But the idea of Histoire Numorum Online is to create something similar, sort of a comprehensive overview, but at the moment, it really only focuses on the coinage of Caria, and this is being developed by colleagues of ours in France. This lovely site, developed by Evi Markou in Greece, focuses on her specialization, which is Cypriot coinage. And this, of course, includes a typology, but also a lot of other resources, a lot of digitized articles, and other literature focusing on Cypriot coinage. So if you have any interest at all in ancient Cypriot coinage, this really is a place to start your research. This site, Moneda Iberica, has been developed by colleagues of ours in Spain, and as you can imagine, focuses on the coinage of ancient Iberia. And if any of you are familiar at all with this coinage, you'll know that it is an incredibly difficult coinage to study, in part because the types and the weight standards and everything else changed and varied, and the authorities and all the rest of that is really quite complicated. But our colleagues, led in this case by Perry Paropoulos, have done an amazing job of trying to bring some order out of the chaos that is Iberian coinage. So certainly worth spending some time looking at this website. And then, of course, the ongoing Roman provincial coinage print publication series has a digital component where they are also trying to create effectively a digital version of the entirety of the multi-volume Roman provincial coinage series. And so, in fact, in some cases, some of the volumes are appearing first online rather than in print, although the print publication, of course, continues. And in fact, the most recent volume just came out, one that was written by Chris Haugigo, again at Oxford. The Celtic Coin Index is something that Ethan Gruber helped develop, again, based on a Numishare platform. This has been a multi-generational project that initially was just done on index cards as a way to catalog and try to create a typology of Celtic coins. But this index now has been digitized and has been made available online just very recently, in fact. So if you have any interest in Celtic coinage, this would be a place to start. As I mentioned, at the Numismatic Society, we have two resources based or focusing on hoards. One is the Coin Hoards of the Roman Republic project or site, and then coinhoards.org. But our colleagues in Oxford have developed this amazing site, Coin Hoards of the Roman Empire. And this is amazing simply for the enormous volume of coinage that they have recorded in this site. And a lot of this material also, in fact, comes from metal detectorists working in England, where the portable antiquities scheme allows that sort of metal detectoring, just so long as it's done in this framework, this legal framework where the state essentially has first dibs on whatever it is the metal detectors find. But because of that portable antiquities scheme, they are able to record a lot of hoards. And there are similar programs, in fact, in the Netherlands and elsewhere. So you can see, looking at this site, just the vast amounts of data that they have for the Roman Empire, which, in fact, makes the Greek data that we have, really just pale in comparison. I did mention a little bit earlier the numismatic portal, and this, of course, is becoming the place to begin any sort of research, particularly if you're looking for older articles or archival information, archival resources such as those at the Numismatic Society and so forth. And it really has been an amazing project. In fact, we've had at the Numismatic Society for a number of years now a young woman who has been just day in, day out, digitizing everything in our library and our archives as part of this project. So what we have at the Numismatic Society increasingly in our holdings is starting to appear and has appeared on the Newman Numismatic portal. So if you haven't checked it out, this really is an important place to go. I just want to mention briefly a few other projects. One is Pondera, and this is a site that has been put together by a Belgian colleague, which is an attempt to catalog and present online all known ancient weights. And for those of you who have any interest in ancient metrology or weight standards, this also is increasingly becoming an important resource just to be able to compare the weights with the coins and to see how that metrology corresponds, or in many cases, frankly, just doesn't. This project, Silver, was something that was started by an enormous multi-million euro grant from the European Research Council to try to trace through scientific analysis where silver that was being used in the production of coinage and other utensils and so forth found in the ancient world, to trace it from the mine to the object and how those circuits worked. As part of that study, though, they also digitized Francois de Calatay's enormous comprehensive overviews of Greek die studies. And so this die study component, the die study database, is a very useful tool for doing statistical analysis of dies and what that means in terms of economies. And then also digitized is Francois's Greek overstrike database, which has the acronym GOD in this case. Something, again, if you have interest in Greek coinage, something to be aware of and to check out. And then finally, the Flame Project, which is run by Alan Stahl at Princeton University. And this is an attempt to frame the late antique and early medieval economy, but trying to look at it through the lens of coins, both coin types as well as hoard material. So just to wrap up, where are we going with all of this? As you can see, over the last 20 years especially, we have been spending a great deal of time, effort, and frankly, money building all of these resources. And as I'm sure you've seen and surmised, a lot of what we've been doing so far has been focusing mostly on the ancient world, moving a little bit into the late antique period and medieval. But where we really hope to go ultimately with all of this is to create tools for every period and every type of coinage across the numismatic spectrum. We would hope that in say another 20 years or so, that we will have tools that, say focus on South American coinage or say colonial US coinage, and that we have built out the component parts of nomisma.org to capture and stabilize the terminology associated with all of that, and then say digitize as well John Kleberg's book on U.S. hoards and coin finds and so forth, so that we could add that, say, to coinhoards.org. So coinhoards.org can in time then become something that focuses not just on Greek coin hoards, but on coin hoards across the spectrum as well. So ultimately, we really do want to try to create a comprehensive digital world and suite of resources that really will allow you to know more about that coin of yours in hand or the coin that you wish was in your hand. So, with that, I'll wrap it up and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate it. And from the curatorial standpoint, this is great. I really enjoyed this. And this has given me some good ideas for things to look at in the future. We do have a few questions, many of which were just asking when the database would be expanded to other types of coinage. So one of the main ones that I thought was really important was, does anyone have access to this, or do you have to be an ANS member?
No, in fact, we are really rather committed to open access. And of course, because several of these projects that we built, excuse me, were built with NEH funding. The fact that we did use federal funding for this means that these have to be open access. So all of the resources that I've talked about and discussed to this point, trying to think if there are any that are behind a firewall, but none of the numismatic society's digital resources are behind a firewall. They are all open access. And to answer the question about when, so as I mentioned, we are doing a major database cleanup and restructuring at the Numismatic Society, and a lot of this has to do with trying to clean up the terminology for all of our departments, not just Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and so forth, but also US, medieval, early modern, and the rest of that. And as part of that big cleanup project, we have been going through those departments and trying to standardize the terminology. And that standardized terminology that we've been working on internally will then ultimately become the basis for forming Nomisma IDs that we can then use to develop, more of these projects. So, in fact, there's a lot of crossover between the work that we do on one aspect and how that then informs and has an impact on other aspects of what we do.
That's great. Someone asked if you're including any kind of grading or estimated grades within the database, and if you're planning to do that in the future.
At the moment, we really haven't talked about that so much.
Less important with ancient, so it makes more
Well,
sense.
yeah, but there are aspects of that, even with ancient coinage that at some point might become important because obviously not just for collectors, but also for numismatic researchers, because when you're looking at, say, the coins from a hoard and trying to develop, say, a internal or comparative chronology, having a sense of how much wear some of these coins have, in other words, their grade, really can then have an impact on the way that you interpret chronologies or other aspects of that. So, it is something that has been mentioned, but at this point, we're not really seriously pursuing it. But we'll see.
Future, yeah, that's awesome. Does the ANS, can you talk a little bit about the ANS collection? There are a few questions here that ask about if it includes US and what it includes. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, the Numismatic Society's collection, US collection, is hugely important. We have a very large and important collection of large cents. And of colonial material, of a lot of let's see, pre-Civil War store cards, tokens, really rather comprehensive collection of patterns, including a brasher doubloon.
Just to
U.S.
name
golds. I
specific.
mean, the U.S. gold collection that we have is really quite spectacular. Unfortunately, we don't have a 1933 double eagle, but then
Oh
who does, right?
no,
So,
but who?
I mean, we do have a 32 double eagle, of course. We also have a good number of the 1907 St. Gaudens patterns,
Oh my
some of the high
gosh.
relief and ultra high relief coins as well. So it really is an important collection. And at this point, I believe a lot of that has been photographed. So you can find a good portion of the US collection already online
Oh, wonderful.
through Mantis. And again, as I mentioned, towards the end of the year, searching for that material online should get a lot easier as we, continually standardize and work through that cataloging.
Okay. Does it include paper?
It does. And in
There
fact,
you
we
go.
also have a rather large and
As
comprehensive
I figured, but I just
collection
wanted to.
of US paper, colonial paper, but world paper is also quite impressive. In fact, our collection of German Notgeld from the early 1920s is really a rather large and impressive collection as well, too. So
So interesting. Um, One of the questions is, are you incorporating the authoritative catalog reference numbers, Friedberg, Krauss, et cetera, when you're putting these things together
yeah, so
as
a
you
lot
get
of
further? Yeah.
yeah, and in fact, a lot of that already exists in Mantis, and
Okay.
that always has been a component part of our cataloging is trying to incorporate that reference into the catalog. And the problem that we've had is that earlier catalogers would just put, say, the initial, say Thompson, if they're referring to Margaret Thompson and her
Yeah.
study of New Style Athenian coinage, they will just put a T dot or T period, whatever the type number is. And so if you know that Thompson did this large study of New Style coinage, you will understand what that T refers to, but other people won't. And so this is a problem that we have across the collection. So one of the things that we are trying to address with the cataloging refurbishing that we're doing is trying to address that reference component so it'll be much, much more clear to users what that reference is, and be much more transparent or open about it. So it'll be much more usable to people who are not specialists in that particular coinage.
Right. I think that's so important so that people have a broader understanding.
Yeah.
Let's see, other questions. People are asking about whether or not you are scanning archives or if you're just going to, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, in fact, even before the numismatic portals set up their outpost, as it is, at the ANS to do a lot of scanning, we already had a number of scanning projects. And some of these scanning projects, like the one that we did with Hellenistic coinage, was to scan it, but then also to tag it so that these handwritten notes of Newell's, for example,
Oh,
would wherever he mentions a particular monogram or type or whatever else, we would then be able to link that handwritten note to something else. And so,
like an
if
interconnected web so
right.
that you can
So
make that
if you look
connection.
at what we've done with Newell's notebooks, you'll see that they are all tagged and linked to other things, whether it's the coinhoards.org or to a typology or whatever else. And ultimately, if we could do that with all of our archives, it would be great. But that is enormously time consuming to tag all of that material. So in the meantime, I mean, we are trying to digitize as much of our archives as possible. And this includes a lot of really important correspondence, a lot of really rare books and manuscripts and, things of that sort. So part of what Laura, the person working for Newman Numismatic Portal, has been doing at the ANS, in fact, has been scanning a lot of our archives. So our paper, archives. So
It's just a matter of time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, as a 164-year-old institution, our archives are quite extensive and, do include a lot of really important figures in numismatics from the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. So,
So just to finish off, we have one more question, which I think is kind of interesting. It's asking about different types of resources and whether or not you think what kind of research you think people should be doing. One of them is asking about online archives of private collections and catalogs and whether whether or not you think that is a resource that they should be relying upon, or should they be looking at more, I think, scholarly options?
It really depends because
Yeah.
a lot of collectors are, scholars. I mean, they might not, for example, have a PhD and might not, consider themselves scholars per se, but most anybody involved in numismatics has a tremendous interest in history to begin with. Most people I know who are involved with numismatics are also people who are really interested in details,
Yes.
and can get really quite obsessive about a lot of this sort of thing. And so the notes and records that a lot of collectors and numismatists keep and the observations that they make of coins, not only in their collection, but elsewhere, very often are important. There are really good notes, from collectors that we have in our archives, as well as just observations that people have made in correspondence or what have you. So, I for the most part, I think that all of us, to one degree or another, are making a contribution. And as long as this is written down and accessible someplace,
Just being aware of what
yeah,
you're relying upon and thinking about that.
yeah. I,
That
I mean, obviously, some sources are a little better and more reliable than others, but
you don't say.
yeah,
Well, thank you, Peter. I really appreciate this. This was super informative, even just for me, and I'm
yeah.
sure our listeners would agree. So I'm going to sign off by saying thank you again,
No,
and to
it's
let
my
everyone
pleasure.
know that our regularly scheduled Numisma talks are being recorded and will be available to our members on our new e-learning academy at the end of April. So be sure to check out future programs on our website at money.org. And then welcome to the fourth. Oh, nope, that's the end. This is something else. It's Friday.
It's
So thank you
Friday.
so, I
Yes.
know, right? Can we believe it? Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
That was
And
my pleasure. My
really nice to
pleasure.
meet you
Yeah, you too.
digitally.
Yep.
We're all about the digitalization these days.
Yep.
And with that, we will sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Have a good evening. Enjoy
Have
your
a good
weekend.
evening. Enjoy the bells. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.